Hi, it's Paul, and this is the third part of my series on hope. In the last two videos, I've shared about finding hope early in my sobriety and how to practice muscular hope by taking actions, working to create the world I hope for. Today, I want to talk about something called radical hope, a concept that has sustained me through a decade of working with people experiencing homelessness. Over 30 years ago, I was given an opportunity to take actions that would change my life. Most people are surprised to learn that these actions often had little to do with addressing my problems directly. I was taught to take indirect action, focusing on the needs of others instead of scrambling to cover my ass and avoid pain. I learned to focus outside of myself and to ask for help for everyone, not just for myself. And amazingly, many of the problems resolved themselves simply because I stopped ruminating on them. By the end of the second year in recovery, every problem I'd had when I entered this new life was either gone or fading away. And I had discovered a spiritual life unlike anything I knew was possible. After being ejected from the church of my childhood, I'd committed myself to atheism. I was angry at God, or arguing with everyone who tried to preach to me. Watching all of my friends die, painful, lonely deaths during the AIDS crisis, proved to me there could be no God, especially not the vindictive God preached by televangelists. But there was this emptiness inside me that I couldn't fill. Years later, my mentor Ed referred to it as a God-shaped hole. I tried everything to fill that emptiness. I drank a lot, obviously. I took every drug that was offered to me. I convinced myself I was a Buddhist and bought meditation pillows, although meditating in the morning still hungover was not very productive. When the New Age movement arrived, I read every book on native spirituality and hung around with a medicine man. And while I was surrounded by people all the time, I remained alone, angry and grieving, unable to find an answer sufficient to close this giant wound. Then came treatment. Then I met Ed. Ed was the first person in a long time who asked me to kneel and pray. After promising me that if I did what he asked, I'd never need to drink again, he told me to get on my knees that night and ask God for help. When I said I didn't believe in God, he said, well, then get on your knees and pray to the God you don't believe in. Ed never pushed doctrine on me. He was private about his spiritual life. But when I struggled with surrendering my will, he gave me a book that changed everything. Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount. He said, read this, and if you still don't believe in God, we can talk about it. No one had ever told me about Christian mysticism. I'd read all the popular books on Eastern mysticism, but I never imagined it existed within the tradition I was raised in. That book set me on a 30-year journey of practice, praying, acting, and eventually learning to meditate properly. Years later, I'd been invited to share my story in front of a large group of people. After I returned to my seat, Ed handed me a thick envelope and said, read this when you get home. I was so full of myself in those days. My life was taking off. I was an executive at Hilton. People were asking my advice. I was even offering unsolicited advice to folks when I thought they needed it, thinking I knew everything. I was sure this envelope contained knowledge in accordance with my spiritual stature, the advanced spiritual secrets I deserved, the graduate level spirituality I saw Ed and his peers practicing. When I read those 25 pages that night, I was a little angry. This wasn't what I expected at all. It was a collection of spiritual readings, some prayers, and a list of 12 simple things to do every day to be truly happy. Things like make your bed, brush your teeth, call 3 people a day. I called someone else who'd gotten what I assumed was the same envelope that night, thinking there'd been a mistake. No, he confirmed, that's everything. I didn't know it at the time, but that was exactly what my spiritual condition needed, a little ego deflation. Ed set the platform for my entire spiritual development with those simple daily actions. The people who came in and out of my life after that became my greatest teachers. One day, when I was struggling with whether or not to return to my childhood church, Ed said, Quit bothering them. They don't want you. I was sad. I knew he was right. That no matter how hard I tried to be good, the church I grew up in would never accept me as a gay man. But then he followed up with something profound. What you need is a relationship with a higher power you can talk to like a friend, without shame or judgment, someone you can share everything with. That's what prayer really is anyway. And if you're doing it right, everything you do and say will be a prayer. So we arrive at today, in the midst of all the chaos in our world, and there's always been chaos, it just affects us all unevenly, feeling hopeful for what comes next. Being older is a gift. It gives me the context for the authoritarian, greedy, genocidal actions headlining every news outlet. I've experienced America behave badly before. Racism, violence, hatred, greed. I'm even a member of a minority that's been scapegoated my entire life. Yet you and I are still here, bruised but not defeated. This doesn't make the current atrocities any less horrific, or the greed any less destructive. But I refuse to lose sight of what I've learned to call radical hope. Witnessing destruction while nurturing what's emerging, knowing better things will come. Let me define what I mean by radical hope, drawing from some brilliant thinkers. Author Jonathan Lear wrote that radical hope is hope that exists even when we are experiencing the destruction of our culture. Writer Junot Diaz said, from the bottom will come the genius that makes our ability to live with each other possible. And Thomas Merton defined it as an unexpected, incomprehensible, and total gift, adding that hope is always most necessary, precisely where everything, spiritually, seems hopeless. Radical hope is a gift. So I try to live my life today as a prayer. I'm not great at it, but I'm conscious of trying to do it. The work I do serving people experiencing homelessness is a great place to practice. My life outside of work is harder, and I rely on many friends, books, prayers, and tools to help me stay connected to that consciousness. When it all feels like too much, I return to Merton's message. It is my joy to tell you to hope, though you think that for you of all people, hope is impossible. Hope not because you think you can be good, but because God loves us irrespective of our merits. Working in the margins, whether with people experiencing homelessness or in recovery or any other form of service to others, requires tools that go beyond strategy and good intentions. It requires a hope that can exist even when everything else seems to be falling apart. That's radical hope. It's enough to sustain us. It's enough to keep us going when logic says we should give up. Thanks for joining me for this series on hope. I'd love to hear your thoughts on radical hope in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, consider subscribing for more conversations about how we can serve each other and build community even in difficult times. Stay safe, and remember, from the bottom will come the genius that makes our ability to live with each other possible.